Kelly Ann Bates was only 17 years old when she met the man who would ultimately destroy her life. She was young, full of potential, and like so many teenagers, she wanted independence, love, and a sense of belonging. What she found instead was a nightmare so cruel, so horrific, that even the pathologist who examined her body later confessed that he had never seen such abuse inflicted on a human being in his career. It all began in 1993. When Kelly was just 14, she met James Patterson Smith, a man 32 years older than her. At first glance, Smith appeared to be charming, even protective. But in reality, he was a predator who preyed on vulnerable young girls. He had a documented history of violence, having previously abused his partners, some of whom had reported beatings, strangulation attempts, and sadistic behavior. Yet somehow, Smith always managed to avoid serious consequences. Kelly, tragically, would not. By 1996, Kelly had moved in with Smith, despite her parents' deep concerns. They noticed something was wrong almost immediately. She began to withdraw from her family, skipping visits, and cutting off contact with friends. Her once bright personality started to fade. She became secretive, her spark dimming under the weight of Smith's control. But the horror taking place inside Smith's home was far worse than anyone could have imagined. For weeks leading up to her death, Kelly endured abuse that defies comprehension. She was beaten with objects, burned with hot irons, and stabbed repeatedly. Her body showed countless injuries, inflicted over time, each wound evidence of a sadistic pattern of torture. The worst of all came when Smith deliberately blinded her. Reports later revealed that Kelly's eyes had been gouged out long before her final day. Experts suggested this was done to completely strip her of hope and independence, leaving her at the total mercy of her captor. Imagine the terror of being trapped, unable to see, unable to escape, relying on the very man who was destroying you piece by piece. Kelly's suffering was prolonged and calculated. She was deprived of food and water, forced to endure unimaginable agony while Smith tightened his control. And yet, despite it all, Kelly tried to survive. She clung to life, her body absorbing weeks of relentless punishment, even as her spirit was broken. On April 16, 1996, the nightmare finally ended. Smith drowned Kelly in the bathtub. But even in death, the evidence of her suffering spoke louder than words. When her body was discovered, the pathologist who examined her injuries was left shaken. He described it as the worst case of abuse he had ever encountered. In his career, he had seen countless victims, but Kelly's torture was something beyond human comprehension. Her body bore more than 150 separate injuries. There were stab wounds from knives, forks, and scissors. Her ears, nose, and mouth bore marks of violent attacks. Her burns revealed the use of boiling water and heated irons. Her scalp showed evidence of clumps of hair being torn out. And, of course, there was the fact that she had been blinded, her eyes deliberately removed weeks before she was killed. It is difficult to comprehend how anyone could inflict such cruelty, let alone on someone so young. Kelly was just a teenager, barely stepping into adulthood. Instead of living her dreams, she was imprisoned, tortured, and murdered by a man who should never have had the chance to harm her in the first place. When the case went to trial, the details stunned the courtroom. Witnesses testified about Smith's violent past, his history of abusing young women. But it was the evidence of Kelly's suffering that left the greatest mark. The jury was forced to confront images and reports that revealed the full extent of her torture. It was so disturbing that even seasoned professionals struggled to process it. During the trial, Smith showed no remorse. He attempted to shift blame, insisting that Kelly somehow provoked the attacks or that she enjoyed the violence. His words added another layer of cruelty to the already unbearable tragedy. But no one believed him. The evidence was overwhelming. Kelly had been systematically destroyed by the man she trusted. Her parents, Tommy and Margaret Bates, sat through the trial with unimaginable pain. They had tried to protect their daughter, but Kelly like many young victims, believed in the lies of her abuser. She thought she could handle it, that she could make it work. But she never stood a chance against the brutality of James Patterson Smith. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour before finding Smith guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a recommendation that he serve at least 20 years. For Kelly's family, however, the sentence was a hollow victory. No number of years could undo the horror she endured. No punishment could erase the memories of what their daughter suffered. Even now, decades later, the case of Kelly and Bates is remembered as one of the most disturbing examples of domestic abuse in the UK. It is a chilling reminder of how abusers manipulate, isolate, and destroy their victims, often in ways that outsiders cannot see until it is too late. But Kelly's story is also a call to action, a warning about the importance of recognizing the signs of abuse and speaking out before it is too late. Her life may have ended in tragedy, but her memory continues to raise awareness, forcing society to confront the darkest corners of human cruelty. Kelly's last days were unspeakably cruel. Despite being battered and blinded, she still tried to resist. Neighbors later testified they heard faint cries, thuds, and even muffled screams, but nobody dared to interfere. Smith had built such a terrifying persona that no one wanted to step inside his world of darkness. For Kelly, every day blurred into a storm of agony, her skin scarred, her body broken, her mind drained, yet she still clung to life. The resilience of an innocent 19-year-old girl fighting for survival against a sadist is perhaps the most haunting part of this story. The end came on April 16, 1996. That day, James Patterson Smith forced Kelly into the bathtub. Already weakened beyond human endurance, she couldn't resist. In what would be his final act of control, he drowned her. When police arrived at his home later that day, the sight that met them shocked even seasoned detectives. Kelly and Bates' lifeless body was discovered in the blood-stained bathroom, bearing the marks of unimaginable cruelty. She had endured 40 separate injuries, many inflicted repeatedly over time. Her body told the story her lips were never allowed to share. The post-mortem was unlike any other. The pathologist, hardened by years of examining violent deaths, admitted this case shook him to the core. In fact, he stated that Kelly and Bates' injuries were the most extensive and harrowing he had ever seen in his career. It wasn't just the volume of wounds, but the methodical, sadistic way they had been inflicted, deliberate mutilations designed not to kill instantly, but to torture and break her spirit over weeks. Forensic experts noted injuries from knives, scissors, boiling water, and blunt objects. But the most chilling fact was that Kelly had her eyes gouged out weeks before her death, forced to live in complete darkness, helplessly dependent on the very man who tortured her. At trial, the evidence against James Patterson Smith was overwhelming. Witnesses recalled how he openly bragged about controlling women. Kelly's diary entries revealed glimpses of her silent suffering. Hence, she had tried to reach out but never got the help she so desperately needed. The jury listened in horror as prosecutors laid out the timeline of her captivity, and the room fell silent when the photographs of her injuries were shown. Some jurors reportedly cried, while others looked away. The brutality was beyond imagination. Smith's defense attempted to paint him as a man who simply lost control, but the systematic torture told a different story. This wasn't a sudden act of rage, it was weeks of intentional cruelty, planned and executed with sadistic precision. On May 19, 1997, James Patterson Smith was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 20 years. Yet for many, this punishment felt like an insult to Kelly's memory. How could such evil be measured in decades behind bars, when a young woman's life was erased in the most horrific way imaginable? The case of Kelly and Bates left scars not only on her family, but on the entire nation. Her mother, Margaret, became an advocate for raising awareness about abusive relationships, urging young women to recognize the warning signs of controlling partners. She often spoke about Kelly's quiet bravery, how her daughter endured hell yet never let go of her dignity. The trial and aftermath opened conversations in the UK about domestic abuse, manipulation, and the dangers of ignoring red flags in relationships. What stands out most in Kelly's story is not only the cruelty she endured, but the chilling normality of her killer. James Patterson Smith wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in alleyways. He was someone who lived among ordinary people, capable of hiding his monstrous side until it was too late. That reality struck fear into many, reminding society that predators often wear masks of charm and normalcy, trapping victims in webs of control and fear before revealing their true selves. For pathologists, detectives, and even journalists who covered the trial, Kelly's case became one they would never forget. It wasn't just another statistic, it was a haunting example of how one man's sadism destroyed a promising life for those who study true crime. It remains a textbook case of coercive control taken to its most violent extreme. As the years passed, Kelly's memory lived on, not only in the grief of her family, but in the warnings her case carried. Schools, support groups, and charities often reference her story as a stark reminder of the dangers of ignoring controlling behavior. Her story became a tragic symbol, a name spoken whenever people ask, how far can abuse really go if left unchecked? Today, nearly 3 decades later, the horror of Kelly and Bates' final days still resonates. Her suffering stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern British crime history. It forces us to ask difficult questions. How do we protect those trapped in abusive relationships? How do we intervene before tragedy strikes? And why do monsters like Smith slip through the cracks, leaving devastation in their wake? Kelly was only 19, young, hopeful, with her whole life ahead of her. Instead, her story was written in pain, sealed in blood, and remembered in sorrow. Yet her name continues to echo, not as a victim, but as a reminder that silence kills, that abuse escalates, that behind closed doors, unimaginable horrors can unfold. This is not just the story of Kelly and Bates. It is a call to vigilance, to speak up when you see control disguised as love, to reach out when someone seems trapped in fear, to never underestimate the danger of abusers who manipulate, isolate, and dominate. Because Kelly's tragedy should never be repeated. If you found the story important, don't let it fade into silence. Share it, talk about it, and keep her memory alive. More people need to understand the devastating consequences of unchecked abuse. For more stories of history's darkest crimes and the victims who should never be forgotten, make sure to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video. Together, we can turn these haunting tales into lessons for the future.